The text message came on a Tuesday morning while I was still in my bathrobe, pouring my second cup of coffee. I remember the light coming through the kitchen window the way it always did that time of year. Thin and pale, the kind of winter light that makes everything look a little washed out. I'd been standing there thinking about whether to call my daughter later that day, just to chat, the way we used to before life got so complicated between us. Then my phone buzzed on the counter. It was from my husband. We'd been married 38 years. Good news. Uncle Harlan left everything to me. We're talking real money, Edie. This changes things. I'll be home tonight to talk. I read it twice. Then I set my coffee cup down, very carefully, because my hands had started to shake. Uncle Harlan. My husband's reclusive great-uncle who'd lived alone in rural Tennessee for as long as anyone could remember. A man I'd met exactly 4 times in 38 years. A man who'd never once called us, never once visited, never once sent so much as a birthday card to our grandchildren. I thought, for just one small, foolish moment, that this was good news. That my husband had texted me the way a partner texts their partner when something unexpected happens. That we had inherited something together. I thought that right up until he walked through the front door at 7 o'clock that night and sat down across from me at the kitchen table with the look on his face I'd never seen before. Or maybe I had seen it before. Maybe I just hadn't known what it meant until that night. We need to talk about some things, he said. Not I've been thinking about us. Not I have some news. Just, we need to talk about some things. Like I was an employee. Like this was a meeting he'd scheduled. I folded my hands in my lap. Okay, I said. Talk. He told me the inheritance was significant. He wouldn't give me a number at first. He said Uncle Harlan had been more careful with money than anyone had known. No family to speak of, no real expenses, decades of modest living and smart investments. He said the estate was still being processed, but the attorney had given him a preliminary figure that was, and here he paused, like he was savoring something, life-changing. How much? I asked. He named a number that made me go very quiet inside. Then he said, I've been doing a lot of thinking. I recognized that sentence. I'd heard it before, years ago, from my own mother before she told me she was selling the house I'd grown up in. I've been doing a lot of thinking. It's what people say right before they do something they've already decided to do. I think, my husband said, that this is a chance for me to start fresh. I'm 66 years old, Edie. I don't have that many years left where I can actually live the way I want to live, I said. And how is it that you want to live? He didn't look at me when he answered. He looked at the table. Not like this, he said. Those 3 words sat between us like something that had been dropped from a great height. Not like this. Not like this house. Not like this life. Not like this marriage. Not like me. I don't know how long I sat there after he finished talking. He said a lot of things after that. About lawyers, about the house, about how he thought I should consider moving somewhere smaller, somewhere more manageable. He said he'd been unhappy for a long time. He said he hoped I understood that this wasn't about anything I'd done. He said he still cared about me. Of course he did. I didn't say much. I'm not a woman who screams. I never have been. My mother wasn't that way either. She was a woman who went very still when things got hard, who got quiet in a way that you could feel in the room like weather coming. I'd inherited that from her, I suppose, along with her bone structure and her tendency to cry at dog food commercials. That night, I went to bed in the guest room. I lay on top of the covers in the dark and stared at the ceiling and tried to think clearly. What did I actually have? What had I spent 38 years building? What was mine and what wasn't? And what did any of that even mean when the person you'd built it all with had just looked at you across your own kitchen table and said, not like this? I thought about the house. We'd bought it in 1991, when the neighborhood was still a little rough around the edges, when the asking price was something 2 teachers could actually manage. I'd been teaching 4th grade then. My husband had been working at the district office, doing curriculum development, the kind of job that sounds impressive until you realize it mostly means a lot of meetings and not a lot of money. I thought about the early years, when the furnace kept breaking and we couldn't afford to fix it right, and I used to sleep in my coat some nights in January, when we ate a lot of eggs because eggs were cheap, when our daughter was small and needed braces, and we had to move money around for 3 months just to make it work. I thought about the way I'd gone back to school at 42 for my master's degree, nights and weekends, so I could move into administration and we could afford to put money away. I thought about the retirement account I'd built for us, about the savings, about every financial decision we'd made together, or that I'd thought we'd made together. I thought, what is mine? I didn't sleep. The next morning, before my husband was even awake, I drove to my daughter's house. She opened the door in her pajamas, her hair still messy, and took one look at my face and stepped aside without saying anything. That's the kind of daughter she is. She's always known when to ask questions and when to just let me in. I sat at her kitchen table and I told her everything while she made coffee. She didn't interrupt. She didn't react dramatically. She got very still the way I do, the way her grandmother used to, and when I finished, she sat down across from me and said, "Mom, before you do anything else, I need you to call Aunt Connie's daughter." Aunt Connie's daughter was my niece by marriage. She'd been a family law attorney in Indianapolis for 20 years. I'd seen her at Thanksgiving and Christmas, and I'd never once thought about what she did for a living in any practical way. I called her that morning from my daughter's kitchen. She picked up on the second ring. "Aunt Edie," she said. "What's going on?" I told her. I tried to be organized about it, tried to give her the facts in order, but I could hear my own voice wavering somewhere in the middle, and I had to stop and take a breath and start again. She listened. Then she said, "Okay. First question, whose name is the house in?" I had to think about that. "Mine," I said slowly. "I think mine." When we refinanced in 2004, we had some tax situation. My husband said it made more sense to put it in my name only. I remember signing things. "Do you have those documents?" I didn't know. Maybe. Probably somewhere in the filing cabinet in the study, in the green folders I kept all the important papers in. I'd always been the one who kept the important papers. "Find them," she said, "and don't say anything else to him about the divorce until we've talked again. Can you do that?" I could do that. She called me back that afternoon. She wanted to drive down that weekend. She wanted to look at everything, the deed, the retirement accounts, the savings, everything. She said something I didn't fully understand at the time, but that I kept turning over in my mind afterward. "Edith, the inheritance may actually work in your favor here, depending on how this all plays out." I didn't understand what she meant. Not yet. That weekend, she spread everything across my daughter's dining room table. My daughter's, not mine, because I didn't want to be in my own house more than I had to be, and she went through it all piece by piece while I sat there watching her face. She had her father's eyes, pale blue and very direct, the kind of eyes that don't waste time looking away from things. "Okay," she said finally, sitting back. "Here's where you are. The house was mine, completely, legally, unambiguously mine. The deed was in my name alone and had been since 2004. My husband had no legal claim to it. The retirement account, the main one, the one I'd spent 22 years contributing to through the school district, was mine. In my name. He was the listed beneficiary, but that was a beneficiary designation, not ownership. I could change that. The joint savings account was joint, which meant we both had access and both had claim, but it also meant neither of us could drain it without consequences. The inheritance, Uncle Harlan's money, was more complicated. Tennessee was not a community property state. Indiana, where we lived, was not either. Inheritance, in most cases, remained the separate property of the person who inherited it. But there were nuances. There were questions about whether any of that money had been commingled with marital assets, about the timing, about how it was held. "The bottom line," my niece said, looking at me steadily, "is that he came into this inheritance thinking he held all the cards. He doesn't, not even close." I sat with that for a moment. "He told me I should think about moving somewhere smaller," I said. "He said it like the house was his to offer." My niece's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes did. "He can't make you leave your own house, Aunt Edie. I want you to understand that. Whatever he says, whatever he implies, you do not have to leave." I went home that evening. My husband was in the living room watching television. I sat down in the armchair across from him. My armchair, the green one I'd had reupholstered twice, and I said, very calmly, "I've spoken with an attorney." He looked at me. "I'll be staying in the house," I said. "You're welcome to hire your own counsel and we can begin the process properly. But I'm not going anywhere." He stared at me for a long moment. Then he said, "Edie, the house isn't really the point here." "It's exactly the point," I said. "It's my house. It's been my house for 22 years. I'd like you to remember that." I went to bed in the guest room again that night, but I slept this time. The months that followed were not easy. I want to be honest about that, because I think sometimes these stories get told in a way that makes it sound cleaner than it is. Like the moment you realize your rights, everything snaps into place and you walk forward into sunlight. It doesn't work that way. There were weeks that were just grinding and gray and exhausting. There were nights I lay awake running numbers in my head. There were moments, alone in the kitchen in the early morning, when I missed him. Not the man he was becoming, not the man who'd sat across from me and said, "Not like this," but the man I'd thought I knew, the one I'd been married to for 38 years. Missing someone who may not have existed exactly the way I remembered is its own particular kind of grief. My daughter came over every few days. She'd bring food, casseroles, mostly, because she'd learned from me that when you don't know what else to do, you make something you can eat. She'd sit in the kitchen with me and we'd talk, and sometimes we'd just sit quietly. And I remembered that she'd been doing some version of this her whole life, showing up, being present. She got that from somewhere, and I hoped it was partly from me. My husband moved out in March, into a condo near the golf course he'd always talked about joining. He took the television from the bedroom and most of the tools from the garage and a set of dishes I'd never particularly liked anyway. He left behind 38 years of accumulated life. The books we'd collected, the photographs, the furniture, the garden I'd spent 15 years building in the backyard. I stayed. There was a period, somewhere in the middle of all of this, when I think he genuinely believed the inheritance would overwhelm everything, that the money would be so significant that any attorney I hired would advise me to settle quickly and take whatever was offered rather than fight over the details. He didn't know, or had forgotten, or had never quite understood, that I was not a woman who settled quickly. That I'd spent 38 years being practical and patient and methodical, and that those qualities don't disappear when someone decides to leave. My niece was meticulous. She documented everything, every contribution I'd made to the marital estate, every year of teaching, every refinance, every account. She found something interesting in the paperwork, something my husband's attorney apparently hadn't considered. When we'd bought the house originally, the down payment had come partly from money my own mother had given us. A gift, she'd said, but she'd written it down in a letter at the time, a letter I'd kept in the green folders, without really knowing why. My niece held that letter up and said, "This matters." It mattered because it established a pattern. It mattered because it was documentation. It mattered in ways I couldn't fully follow, but that she understood precisely. The mediation process took 4 months. My husband's attorney pushed hard on the retirement account, argued that 38 years of marriage entitled him to a share, that my career had been supported by his in various indirect ways over the decades. My niece pushed back with records, with numbers, with a patience that I recognized as a family trait. The inheritance stayed with my husband. That was the law, and it was fair, and I didn't fight it. He'd inherited it from his uncle. It was his. But the house was mine. The retirement account was mine. The savings were split, which was also fair. And there was one more thing, something I hadn't even known to look for until my niece found it. When we'd refinanced the house in 2004, we'd also taken out a small home equity line of credit for some repairs we'd needed. We'd paid it off years ago. But the process of refinancing had generated a document, a joint financial disclosure required by the lender, in which my husband had explicitly listed the retirement account as a marital asset for the purposes of qualifying for the loan, in writing. Signed by him, dated. My niece set that document on the table during the final mediation session, and my husband's attorney went very quiet. We settled that afternoon. I drove home alone, through the late autumn light, through the neighborhoods I'd lived in for decades, past the elementary school where I'd taught for 11 years, and the library where my daughter had done her homework, after school because I was still working, and the church where my mother's funeral had been held 7 years ago now. I pulled into my driveway. I sat in the car for a minute. The house looked the same as it always had. The red door I'd painted myself, the garden that was going brown and quiet for the winter, the porch light that came on automatically at dusk because I'd had my son-in-law set up the timer years ago and never changed it. It was mine. It had always been mine. That fact had existed in documents for 22 years, waiting for the moment it would matter. I went inside and I called my daughter. "It's done," I said. She exhaled, a long, slow breath. "How do you feel?" I thought about that for a moment, standing in my own kitchen in my own house, the winter light coming through the windows the same way it always did. "Like myself," I said. "For the first time in a while, I feel like myself." She came over that evening with her husband and my 2 grandchildren, and we ordered pizza, the kind the grandchildren like, with too much cheese, and we sat around the kitchen table and talked about nothing in particular, the way families do when they're relieved, when they've come through something. At one point, my youngest grandchild, who is 8 and has no filter whatsoever, looked up from her pizza and said, "Grandma, is Grandpa not coming back?" The table got a little quiet. My daughter started to say something, but I shook my head gently. "No, sweetheart," I said. "He's going to live somewhere different now." She considered this with the seriousness 8-year-olds apply to complicated information. Then she said, "Can I have his seat?" And just like that, we were all laughing. My daughter and my son-in-law and even me, laughing in my own kitchen on a cold November evening, pizza going cold on the table, the porch light burning out front, the way it always did. That was 6 months ago. I'm not going to tell you that everything is simple now, because it isn't. There are still days when the house feels too quiet, when I reach for the phone to call someone, and realize I don't know who I'm calling, when the grief I described earlier comes back around like weather. But I teach a knitting class on Thursday evenings at the community center now, something I'd talked about doing for years and never made time for. I've started walking every morning, early, before the neighborhood wakes up, when it's just me and the frost on the grass and the particular silence of early winter. I've been cooking differently, for myself, what I actually want to eat, which turns out to involve more soup and less meat, and occasionally breakfast for dinner, which I've always secretly preferred. My daughter calls every day, sometimes just for a few minutes, sometimes longer. My son-in-law fixed the back gate that had been sticking for 2 years. My grandchildren come on Saturday mornings and we bake things, badly, mostly, with flour on everything, and it is the best part of my week. Last month, I got a card in the mail from my niece. Just a small thing, a notacard with a bird on the front. Inside, she'd written, "You were always stronger than you knew. I'm glad I got to be there when you remembered." I put it on the refrigerator, held up with the same magnet my grandchildren have been rearranging since they were small. I look at it sometimes when I'm making my coffee in the morning, in the thin winter light that comes through the kitchen window, the light that makes everything look a little washed out, but also, if you look at it right, clear. I am 64 years old and I live in my own house and I know exactly what is mine. That is enough, more than enough. It is everything.